Hello, my friends. I've got a special bonus pod, a Can You Talk Real Quick episode, as I call it, with Jason Johnson for you here on this Thursday evening. Before I get started with our hangout, I wanted to post my conversation with Jason, who I talked to yesterday. We always have great talks. He's a really good friend of mine, but we haven't talked even off air in a while. Keep missing each other, but Dr. Jason Johnson, of course, is a political science professor at Morgan State University, but you probably know him from his many appearances on MSNBC, where he's both a contributor and an anchor. He often sits in for Ari Melber, Joy Reid, and more. He is regular on SiriusXM. Jason and I became friendly when we both appeared on CNN way back in the day, and we stayed really good friends. An awesome conversation as always. We talked about a couple things, well, several things. Of course, his name is Jason Johnson, and I made fun of him for that. Of course, the speaker is Mike Johnson. No relation, but still an unoriginal name, and I gave him a hard time about that. And then we talked about the horrific shooting on his campus at Morgan State University and how that really affected him seriously. Talked about gun violence and more. Also talked about his latest episodes of his podcast on Slate, A Word, which is so good. How if a black senator reacted the way the Oklahoma senator did the other day at that hearing, it would be a different story. Politics and so much more. Always a great conversation. And it ends, you got to stay till the end, because I finally unveiled the song dedicated to him by our own Garrett Sever. Well, Buckets and Boards, Garrett Sever, longtime listener, subscriber, contributor, friend of mine, wrote this song for Jason, as he has for so many of our regular guests, and I play it for him at the end. He loves it. Y'all get to hear that for the first time. Should have debuted at the top, but anyway, stay for the end for that. Follow and let Jason know you heard him here on social media. All the info to connect with him is in the show notes. Thank you very much for pressing play. Cannot do it without your subscription. Welcome to new subscribers. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Right now, Dr. Jason Johnson is here. And there he is, Dr. Jason Johnson. What does that stand for?
It stands for Dominican Republic, which is where I'll escape to when this country eventually collapses.
Oh, wait. So is there a Dominican Republican Jason Johnson? That's different from you.
There could be a Dominican Republican Jason Johnson. There could be a District of Russia Jason Johnson.
We've never talked about this. Your name is ridiculously unoriginal. I blame your parents, who I know. I'll talk to your mom about it later. I just actually seriously messaged her on Facebook earlier. But you are not. You are very much like Mike Johnson. Very bland. Very easily. Can't Google him. There's a million of you.
There are like three major Jason Johnsons that I see when I look up. And of course, like you, I'm sure you have like a Google alert for your name. There's a Jason Johnson who's like head of the police force in Dublin, Ireland. So every time there's some horrible crime in Dublin or something, I get an alert because Jason Johnson's done a press conference. There's another Jason Johnson who was like a sport car driver who died a couple years ago. And then there's a Jason Johnson who's like a really great linebacker in college football. Those are the other Jason Johnsons.
Jason Johnson is a name that could easily be white, easily be black.
I mean, for getting loan purposes, yeah, I have fooled people.
That's why your mom didn't name you something more black sounding.
Exactly. Well, here's the funny thing, though. So I'm alluding to having this conversation with somebody last night, and we were saying how you can always tell these interesting sort of class and generational things in black families by like looking at the names of the kids, right? So, for example, my best friend who passed away 2 years ago, his name was Carlton, right? His sister's name was Tammy. Then his younger two siblings were Atu and Akia, right? Like it got real ethnic and real black.
What happened?
Well, black folks start making more money. We start being more confident and comfortable in ourselves. It's the 80s. We can do this now. So
I know a black friend of mine is so confident and successful. He named his child Seven.
Wow.
I made that up.
Okay, I was like, based on new beginnings, based on like the lottery number.
The real confident. I feel like really wealthy people do name their kids ridiculous things sometimes, just as a way to be like, I can, whatever. I got everything I need. The name won't hurt them. They have an inheritance. They have a trust fund.
I can call my child Apple. I can name my child Northwest because everywhere they go, they probably own it already.
That's what I'm saying.
None of these things, I mean, like Will and Jaden named their kid Willow. That's normal. Jaden is almost generic at this point, unless you put a Y in it, which just makes me want to cringe. But, you know, there was that time in the 80s and 90s where every kid had some new weird name that was based on, like, you know, numeric symbols or runes or some weird shit.
Man, when a kid came into my school with an ethnic name when I was growing up, all pretty much white school, there's this Indian kid named Xerxes. And
that's an awesome name.
Yeah, well, not for in the
80s in your all white school.
Not in 1989 and at the. Now I don't know if we were jerks about it or not, but it was shocking. It was just shocking. Like Xerxes, X in it. We didn't even have a kid. We didn't have a kid with an X in his name until Xerxes. By the way, Xerxes, valedictorian.
Right. Well, because you didn't invite him anywhere, so he was like, "Screw all of you. I'm just going to be the best." Yeah. Plus. And here's the interesting name also about, like, I mean, I told you I've written all sorts of stuff about naming and how it's connected to race and class and history and everything like that. The reason that Xerxes hits me the way it does is because I know Xerxes was a king. Yeah. Right. I know he was this badass king, a Persian king who like ran everything. So like that name sounds cool to me. Right. I remember being a kid the first time I met like a Latino student named Jesus. And I was like, hey, how are you named Jesus? Like, that seemed offensive to me. Like, you know, even church-going black folk, you don't name your kid Jesus. That's a little on the nose,
That's a little on the nose.
Yeah. I mean, unless he's, you know, turning Kool-Aid into grape juice and stuff. Then you might call him Welch's instead of Jesus, but one of the two.
So you and I haven't talked in a while, even off the air. I called you twice, and you said, I'll call you back right away, twice, and you didn't. So, and we haven't taped an interview in a long time, but I haven't gotten to actually hear how you're doing since there was a shooting at
Morgan State University, where, of course, you are a professor.
I reached out to you right away, as I'm sure a billion people did. And you basically, all I know is you said, I'm not doing well. That's all I know. So what happened and how are you doing? This was back in October 3rd.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I can tell you the whole story, and I'm really not going to be much different except for the profanity and use of racial slurs that, you know, if we were talking in person. So I'm going to be honest with you. It had been a rough couple of days even beforehand. I had been going through just various kind of tense and complicated personal, professional things. And so interestingly enough, on that Tuesday, I was feeling really down. And I tell people this all the time. You know, I'm always been an advocate of whatever people got to do. If you got to pray, you got to meditate. If weed does it for you, microdosing, therapy, whatever it is you need to get through sort of this human experience. And so I was feeling pretty down, and it's like 5 p.m. and I just turned off all the lights in my house and just lit some candles. And I just was laying on the floor. Like, I was already feeling pretty down for a bunch of different reasons, and was just trying to, you know, be there and be quiet and be in my own space. And then I started getting all these phone calls. All these text messages. And I'm like, I'm like, okay, I'm under my blanket. I'm like, what is this? I was comfortable on the floor, and I check. And the first text message I got that I saw was actually from April Rain. And April texts me and she says, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, like, if that's the first thing you see and you don't know the context, it's already worrisome, right? And she texted me and she was like, "Are you okay?" And then there was a Twitter link under it. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And I click, and then I see there was a mass shooting at Morgan. And I'm like, oh my God. And so then I'm getting calls from my manager. I'm getting calls from significant other. I'm getting calls from my mom. Like, everybody's looking for me. The network called my manager. I had, you know, people who know my schedule were like, wait, Jason's on campus on Tuesdays. And so my phone started ringing off the hook. And I'm already sort of like in this sort of what's going on state. And then I'm just answering a bunch of phone calls for the evening, and I'm turning on the news. And where I live, interestingly enough, is technically closer to DC than to Baltimore. So I was having trouble getting news coverage because it was the wrong TV affiliates. You know, Baltimore's like 50 minutes away. And when I watched it, I was upset. I texted a couple of students. You know, I only have the phone number. I only have a couple of students who have my phone number. I texted them to see if they were okay. One student's like, well, he's like, yeah, I'm good. I'm actually in DC. The other student was like, was actually out of town that day. The day of the shooting was a wellness day. That's the irony of it. And this is a great thing on Morgan's campus. And a couple schools do this, but it's a campus wellness day where literally the focus of the day, there's no classes that day. That's why I wasn't on campus. But the focus of wellness day is to share with students all of the resources and activities and programs available on campus if you are suffering through mental health difficulties. We have counseling centers. We have this, we have this, we have this. So it's a whole day dedicated to that. So to have a mass shooting on Wellness Day is a sort of disturbing, depressing irony. I cried a lot. And because initially we didn't know much about who was harmed or to what degree. I just heard that 4 people had been shot.
Why did you cry? What were you thinking? What were you feeling around hearing the shooting that took place? Was it on the campus? It was homecoming weekend. I'm just reading here about it.
So my understanding of what happened, and this is particularly distressing, is that it's homecoming weekend, and in the sort of theater performance center on campus, right? You have this big sort of theater performance center, and then across the campus street, you have some dorms, and then you have, a brand new cafeteria, like all these tons of construction being done on campus. And so my understanding is that the shooting happened right after the homecoming king and queen were crowned, and people were walking out of like the performance center. And I'm going to be honest with you, in the context of campus violence, right? Or homecoming violence, it's like, if something happens after a rivalry game, you're like, probably some idiots, blah, blah, blah. They got mad because their team lost. If something happens at a party, it's like, well, maybe it was sponsored by some off-campus people, blah, blah, blah. Maybe people can come on. But the idea that anyone would start shooting as people are walking out of the Performance Arts Center after the crowning of the homecoming, it was just insane. Like, it was not something that was fathomable. And I think what led me to crying that night, separate from the things that I was already sort of dealing with, was this idea that, I have nothing I can say or do or create in my head that will rationalize this to make me feel safe. I am worried about my students. I am worried about my students' safety. I am worried about who these kids are who got shot. I didn't know who they were, if they were students that I knew. And I say this all the time as having covered mass shootings on at least 3 occasions as a host on MSNBC in real time while the mass shootings were happening, is when we hear about shootings, we often hear about death tolls. That's bad, right? You don't like hearing anybody die. You don't like hearing people die in mass shootings, which seems to be a unique disease to our country. But being shot and surviving ain't so hot either. And so if you get shot and you live, but you've got a colostomy bag for the rest of your life, if you get shot in the arm and you live, but you are traumatized for the rest of your life, there's lots of other things that can happen to people that cause lifelong trauma and difficulty above and beyond death. And that's before you get to the reverberations of all the other students on campus, how they feel, how my colleagues feel, how everybody felt. And it was just abso-freaking-lutely overwhelming and upsetting.
Yeah, you explained it really well. I appreciate that. I wanted to just get your perspective on how I know you were struggling with it, and we really hadn't gotten a chance. And so I have no answers. I just wanted to make sure I knew how you were feeling. The only thing I would, just add, I guess, is, whether you got actually shot, if you were there at the mall, the church, the school, if you saw the shooter, if you heard the bullet. I mean, like the reason to cry, I guess, the reason to feel terrible is to know that people will now have to live with that experience. And we all have gone through different things in our life, different kinds of things that may or may not have been violent, but it's hard for a lot of people never get past that. But I hope that people, whoever have to experience it, they always respond right with, and I think you already said this, is like, we've got counselors available. Like, okay, well, not sure. I might need one like every week or every month or every year, for the rest of my life, to just kind of continue to heal.
And I'll add to it. And I think that it's just a great production team with the Beat with Ari Melber. I was sitting and hosting on that Friday.
Oh, yeah.
On MSNBC. And I thought I had sent this to you, but I did a whole segment on the shooting. And I'll send it to you. You can, loop it in if you want to.
I'll put it in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it was just about 90 seconds or whatever. But what I talked about was this idea that, this mass shootings for a lot of people are abstract. It's that thing that happened to your one cousin that one time when they left the thing. But these are getting closer to me. And, I years ago, Dylan Roof killed one of my oldest friends, Clem Pinkney, who was the pastor of Mother Emanuel Church. In the last calendar year, there's been a mass shooting at every university I've attended or worked at. There was a mass shooting. There's a shooting at Chapel Hill. There's a shooting at UVA, right? The DC snipers next to last location was the gas station that my family used to use in Fredericksburg every single day before we got onto the highway. When I talked about this with friends, I realized that one of my friends had actually been at that country music festival in Vegas where he'd been shot. Right? He'd been shot.
He was shot. He got shot, or he was just...
No, but he was there. He was there.
Yeah.
And so it's gotten that it was dawning on me that, this is getting closer and closer, and it's not abstract. And I've always been empathetic to people who've gone through these experiences. But when it's your job and it's your school and it's your gas station, and you get this sense that, one day you'll be walking the wrong direction into the mall. And that's the thing that has stuck with me. It did not help that homecoming was canceled at Morgan for various reasons that, I understand the administration doing it. And also because they hadn't caught the 4 perpetrators. And you can't have homecoming if the 4 people are still out there. But when they did catch them, at least 2 of them, I'll be honest with you, everybody, it's easier to process when you have these sort of race or class frames where it's like, oh, yeah, it had to be some thuggish person from Baltimore. It had to be some off-campus person. It had to be some sort of... No, of the 2 kids that I saw, first off, they were kids, like 17, 18 years old. It was two kids in skinny jeans and distressed pants. If they had walked into my office, I would have thought they looked like any other student. So there was no easy way to say, well, this is just Baltimore violence. Yeah. Look, Morgan is a safe campus. It's in the suburbs. Like, it's not like this is the kind of thing that we experience on a regular basis. But that's what makes the sort of prevalence and endemic and pandemic of mass violence in America so scary, is because we can't just chalk it up to certain neighborhoods anymore. It's everywhere, and no one does anything about it.
Well, some people do things about it, right?
They try. And then it doesn't pass.
Well, at the state level, I will push back. I always have to push back on that point. At the state level, in New York and Connecticut and other states have passed laws, and they matter. I think they matter. I think they probably prevented more violence in many states, Colorado as well, I think.
There are
giving the activists the credit that they deserve, who are doing the work every day for staying in the fight and getting laws passed in different ways. And they did pass laws. Where they passed I don't know how much it'll do, but I think probably even this House Republicans passed. I forget what the name of it was, but Biden did sign one law on guns.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are laws in place. Most of them, in most cases, there are laws that actually were already in place that, if enforced properly, would keep most of these crazy, irresponsible people from getting access to guns. But I think the larger thing that I was sort of have been left with is, when you had the mass shooting in Maine afterwards, like, dude, I was just like knocked out for a day. Like it was sort of empathetic trauma, and I hadn't had that experience before. Of like just seeing something now on the news, and I feel like there's just a chunk of wet clay on just weighing on me. Like it was really, really, really disturbing. And I'll be honest, like, it's still with me. It's not like I'm not completely okay. I know I report on it. It's part of my job. It's not an issue of being strong for anybody. It's being empathetic and considerate and observant for my students, because I know for a lot of them, I'll be honest. I was humbled and shocked by some of my students' reactions, the ones who I've spoken to. I'm not a professional counselor, so it's if the student wants to talk with me about it, because, these are all kids born, way post Columbine. I look at my students and I assume they're 18, 19 years old, right, maybe 20. I'm thinking, oh, you've been through these drills your whole lives. It still doesn't change anything. Right.
No,
they're still just as freaked out.
The drills traumatize them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And they also, as Dave Chappelle said, who's always in those drills? The next shooter. He knows whatever precautions are. Exactly. We're all going to go in this room. We're going to, guess who's there? Fucking
right. He's like, I know where the key latch is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, I want to talk to you about some of the recent conversations and guests you've been having on your excellent podcast.
I had Leslie Jones. It was awesome.
Did you know comedian Leslie Jones, former SNL alum, superstar, movie actress? She does it all. It's green. She's writer, actress, comedian. Did you know her before? So
I didn't know Leslie. We met online more or less because she was always clowning me on MSNBC. When we went into the shutdown and everybody started filming from their houses, and then if you're a TV contributor, you had to deal with people across America and the world judging you on your backgrounds and your wallpaper and how clean you keep your kitchen. So Leslie used to watch Deadline White House all the time, and she would just be making fun of me and yelling at me for my outfits and telling me I can't just move the flowers around. So that's how we met. We had met online, right? So it was all cool. And then I've made friends with a number of comedians who are also friends with her. And one of my friends, she was at his birthday. And I was like, oh, dude, I was out of town. I didn't get a chance to go, et cetera, et cetera. So I finally got to meet her in person. I guess it was maybe a month or so ago. She was on her book tour for Leslie fucking Jones, her brand new book. And Tiffany Cross was moderating, sort of doing an interview with her in DC. So I met with Leslie afterwards, connected, brought her on my podcast. We had a great time. I loved having her on the show. I had her. I had Jim Trotter, who was awesome, who was suing the NFL, who had some amazing stories about what a terrible coworker Stephen A. Smith is, and some of the endemic racism in the league. I just actually interviewed, this is a preview because it'll drop maybe next week, Harry Dunn, who has a new book out. And he was one of the Capitol Hill police officers.
Harry's a good friend of mine. He's been on the show a bunch of times. I've been out drinking with him a bunch of times. He once carried me back into my hotel room.
I can believe that because of both your size and Harry's.
Yeah, it was. He lasts a lot longer than me.
Yes,
and but I haven't talked to him about the book. I've been keep missing him, and he's doing tons of shows. But he's great. I wanted to ask you about Juliet Hooker. She's the author of Black Grief, White Grievance, about why anger and even violence has often been framed as justified response to white losses of power and influence, but inappropriate among black people when there's a loss of life. She's a political science professor at Brown University. She was on your show. Do you remember that one? It was early October.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's what's interesting, because this actually folds into the conversation I had with Harry. And he and I met at White House Correspondents' Dinner. He was just chilling. I was like, hey, dude, I know you. We sitting there and talking and hanging out, having a good time. And I asked him this question. I said, there are conversations out there. I know it's cliche to say it's a barbershop. I said, but there's conversations among black folks that what happened on January 6th never would have happened if it was black people. If it had been black people who were rioting and complaining and everything else like that, they'd all just been put down on the shot. Everybody there would have been guns, helicopters, would have slaughtered everybody.
By the way, just sorry to interrupt, but the Black Lives Matter protest that was very controversial, where the president, I believe, came out with the Bible and held it upside down. Remember they had the National Guard out for that. That was a Black Lives Matter protest, my understanding. So that's not a hypothetical.
Right. And here's the thing.
And they weren't rushing the Capitol. They were doing classic protest.
Exactly. Exercising their freedom of speech. Right. And so, and this relates to this sort of white grief, black grievance, white grief, white grievance. Because Harry was like, well, first off, black people wouldn't do that. Black people were smart enough to know that, you go protest, we get shot for protesting. We get shot in our homes not doing anything, right? So the last thing a bunch of black activists and organizers are going to do is rush the Capitol with spikes and spears and things like this. So that's not going to happen. He said, but the secondary thing is, he kind of talked about what their job is and responsibility. my point in starting from him and going back to this is, white people in America are allowed to express their anger and dissatisfaction with current events, policy decisions, and hell, even entertainment in ways that are not acceptable when they're done by non-white people, right? That are not acceptable when done by poor brown people, right? So, for example, I'm watching this clip today.
We're also allowed, just to encompass it, to express a wide range of emotions.
Right. White folks can be anything, be happy and sad and cry. And, I'm watching this clip today. It was a senator. I don't remember his name. A senator from Oklahoma. Pete.
Yeah. It's gone viral at this point. Mullen.
And this dude's like, they having to like, pull up, right? Imagine if Cory Booker did that shit. Yeah. Imagine if Cory Booker was talking to some CEO who had bankrupted hundreds of thousands of people and absconded with the money. And Cory was like, this is how we do it in Newark, right? Like, I think it was funny for about 3 seconds. But of course, all of the press people are like, my goodness gracious, look at Cory Booker. He looks like a thug. And that's our word for N-word, right? All that crap. White people are allowed to act the absolute do the most with any degree of emotions. And because white people primarily control most media outlets and most public discourse, because white people remain the majority of our news and government organizations, it's excused or it's explained. A white mass shooter is like, my goodness, he didn't have any friends and he wasn't invited to prom. He'd never had sex and he was 27 years old. That's what the problem is. A black person who does that, 27 years old, my goodness, what a thug, what a monster. Where was his mother? So, yes, when black people are upset, there are constraints that we are often placed under. I'll tell you, I'm thrilled. I am thrilled, not because of anyone suffering from violence, but I got to tell you, Pete, I am thrilled whenever I hear members of families, and it's members of families, which tells us how often this happens, of black people who have been, unarmed black folk who've been killed by cops, killed by vigilante white people. I'm happy when I hear black folks at those press conferences say, damn straight, I don't forgive these people.
Yeah.
And no, I don't want a damn apology from the police department. I want this person in jail forever. Well, I want them to never see another damn Super Bowl. I want more of us to say that instead of this sort of, I forgive you, because that's the only way we're accepted.
You want more people to show more indignation than forgiveness? I mean, what about all those amazing black folks at the church where your friend and others were killed? They all forgave the shooter whose name you said I won't say.
Here's the thing.
Like, was that because he was arrested and brought, like, they caught him? And I don't know. I mean, is there a difference if there's somehow not justice in that case, but like he's been arrested and he's going to jail for the rest of his life, if not exterminated, if not executed?
Forgiveness is often conflated in public discourse with removing or shifting accountability and responsibility.
I see.
Forgiveness is a personal thing. I forgive you because, as the Buddhist phrase goes, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick.
Indeed.
Right?
Yeah, that's why I'm surprised. That's why I'm surprised. And I think I'm misinterpreting what you're saying about I don't want people to forgive, because I think that it's unhealthy to hold that.
Yeah. You forgive for you, but that don't mean that you don't want that person to face consequences. And that's often different. what we hear, or how what is said is interpreted. I forgive you for shooting up this school, but I want you to spend the rest of your life in jail. I don't want you to ever have another slice of pie. I want you to have to see your wife, your children, everybody else through plastic for the rest of your existence.
But I don't want anybody to be confused, and I know you're not saying this, that you feel that there should always that you're someone who believes in punitive measures when people do the wrong thing, or punishment for crimes that people commit. Because I don't know what you think, but I certainly don't love that at all. I think that's one of the biggest problems with our country, because we're so punitive. We love to punish people who've done wrong. What I've learned as a parent, watching my daughters when they mess up, they actually don't need me to say anything, much less punish them, because they already know they messed up. Like, they feel so bad, not all the time, but often I realize, like, oh, I'm just making it worse. This isn't going to change anything. So, you're talking about these horrific crimes, but you don't mean that in general always when there are people do bad things, that they should be punished?
Yes and no, because I think that sometimes punishment is a matter of interpretation.
Sure. Well, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I know you know this because you have kids. It's like, why are you punishing me? I'm not punishing you. These are the consequences of your actions, right? I told you if you didn't clean up your room that you couldn't go to the party.
Yeah.
And I just told you you're not going to the party. I'm not punishing you, right? These are consequences of the actions, and you knew about them in advance, right? And all too often, I think, punishment is trying to get the other person to feel the harm that they've inflicted on others in the hopes that that will correct them from doing it in the future. And maybe that works, right? But punishment versus consequences, sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes they are not.
Right. Yeah, it's a case by case. There's a lot of nuance to it. And so I hear what you're saying. So I also want to make sure I ask you about a bunch of just things that are happening in the world of politics, which you cover on a pretty regular day-to-day basis, certainly when you're on TV talking about them. But what did you think of the election results last week?
I'm not surprised. I mean, look, this is the thing about what we've got going on right now. One, like, most people don't like what the Republican organization has to offer. Like, if this is a blind taste test, right? Everybody's picking Coke because we know Pepsi's gross. And if it's just a blind taste test and you take the parties away from it, most people are like, yeah, whether I want to have an abortion or encourage someone to have an abortion or have my partner have an abortion, most people like having the option. Most people like having minimum wage be at a reasonable level so they can actually rent an apartment. Most people like being able to have a certain amount of health care. Most people vote for the things that they think make sense. So I'm not surprised when at the state level, Democrats do well because they kind of stand on the policy decisions that most people seem to care about. So whether it's abortion or health care or something else like that, I wasn't surprised. I was happy to see Daniel Cameron lose in Kentucky because I thought that guy was horrible. And I think that him intentionally stifling the investigation into the murder of Breonna Taylor was his blood sacrifice.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about him, the black lieutenant governor of Kentucky who's running for governor against.
He was the AG, yeah.
AG, Bashir. And of course, Bashir won. But I was going to, I saw you talking about that. And of course, Breonna Taylor was killed by police officers in her home. People probably know the story. And this guy, Daniel Cameron, what did he do as a result of that?
I mean, he did nothing. He was the attorney general, conducted a flim-flam investigation, found no one guilty of anything. The cops falsified. I mean, the DOJ came in on this. The Department of Justice is like, hey, the cops falsified information. The police hid information. They had the wrong address. They lied about having the wrong address. So it's like, there were multiple mistakes that were made, and that's a good faith interpretation to say mistakes were made
right
above and beyond the cover up, and someone died. And if someone dies as a result of bad behavior, unprofessionalism, or anything else like that on the part of the state, somebody should be held responsible. And he didn't, because he didn't care, and probably because he thought having this dead black woman's blood on his hands would show him to be the kind of black person that racist white people will be comfortable putting into such an important executive position.
Well said.
Yes, that's what I believe.
Yeah. No, that's pretty much what I was hoping to elicit from you on that. What about the GOP debate? Anything about all the people that aren't Trump and what that is? I mean, I do think it's worth, if everybody's saying, oh, Trump's going to be the nominee. I mean, I think that is, what do you think? I feel like it's so far from guaranteed that he's going to be the nominee in the Republican Party. So why not stay in?
Let's be abundantly clear about the most important thing in the debate.
Go ahead.
Which was Tim Scott finally showing us that he does have a girlfriend and that she didn't just go to another school.
What do you want to say? Let's talk about that for an hour and a half.
I mean, because frankly, it was so awful for so many different reasons. First off, I really push back against this, Pete. You and I have had this conversation when, even as a political scientist, as someone who does political journalism, when we discuss the navigation around bigotry and sexism and racism as strategy, as opposed to acknowledging that it's unfair and unreasonable. Tim Scott was basically being asked to show off his girlfriend to prove that he wasn't gay. That's not good. It's not good that we live in a society where there are large groups of people who will not vote for you if you engage in same-sex relations. We shouldn't be looking at that like, wow, what a smart move by Tim Scott. He showed all those people, blah, blah, blah. We shouldn't be talking about it that way. We should be saying, what a horrible body politic and what a horrible primary population he's dealing with, that these people are like, well, I may like you on policy, but if you have sex with other men, I can't vote for you. Well, that's the first thing.
Why cast a white woman?
That's the other problem. I'm like, dude, the same kind of people who don't want to vote for a gay person probably aren't that cool with you showing up with a white woman. Like, these sort of bigotries tend to overlap. I don't know what he was thinking. He might as well have just said, and now I've converted to Islam. Because none of those things are going to go over well with the Republican organization at this point. And there's nothing, the greatest irony is the very same donors that told Tim Scott, hey, I'm not buying this story that you have this really hot girlfriend that you met at summer camp, but she moved to Canada and you can't talk to her on a regular basis, but she's totally real. Like, the same people who made him bring this woman out turned around 4 days later and said, yeah, dude, you're not going to win.
The same donors. Yeah.
The whole thing is ridiculous. And by the way, notice how no one asked these questions of Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham ran for president. No one even asked Lindsey Graham about who he takes to prom.
It would have been amazing if when Tim Scott finally brought out his girlfriend, it was Lindsey Graham, the senior senator from a lot of, well, they probably take the Amtrak.
That would be the greatest moment.
I just want to say, Tim Scott and I have been baking together for a very long time. Let me ask you, how's Joe? Just answer this and I'll let you go. Joe Biden, how's Joe Biden looking? How's Biden-Harris looking a year out? You got new polls that people are talking about. I know you're talking about this issue. What do you want to say a year out that we should be? How should we be feeling? What should we be thinking?
I'm going to say the same thing that I've been saying all year.
Yeah.
I've been saying this for through and through. You can win an election by having people not like the other guy. Joe Biden pulled us out, and I'm not a Democrat. Joe Biden pulled us out of COVID. He's done a reasonable job of stabilizing the economy. He's done a reasonable job of putting back in guardrails for government, the environment, and everything else like that were absolutely destroyed under Donald Trump. And he's made attempts when it comes to things like guns and police reform. Not as far as I'd like, but he's done actually a halfway decent job as president of the United States, given the difficulty that he no longer has another party to negotiate with because basically the Republicans have devolved into a terrorist cult. Here's the other thing. No matter what anybody says, and you have these polls, and I say it's like the rap lyric, these polls ain't loyal, right? Like, you can't trust any polls that are a year out. People aren't telling the truth a year out. But here's what we do know. Donald Trump is running for president for the third time. He's never won the popular vote. Never won the popular vote. Even if he gets more voters, he still isn't winning the popular vote. And on top of that, Donald Trump has never had to run post January 6th. People are going to be reminded of that all year. He's never had to run post Dobbs. He can't run away from the fact that Republicans are like, we're going to force everybody to give birth and put bounties on people like it's the freaking Handmaid's Tale. And the guy is up on multiple charges next year. And Pete, I have to say this in case anyone doubts it. We're not talking about complicated crap here. We're not talking about campaign finance rules we don't understand. Okay, whatever. He inflated the value of his homes in New York, whatever. Everybody thinks rich people do that all the time. But the stuff in Florida, dude, I don't have to be politically sophisticated to know that you're not supposed to leave the White House with a stack of manila folders that say top secret.
That's bad.
And then hide them next to your toilet.
That's bad. You shouldn't do that, especially in a place where people are coming and going all the time,
Exactly.
One thing if you put them in your garage with the Corvette like Biden did, or even Mike Pence did, or whoever else, like he lives in a goddamn hotel.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, before you go, 2 years ago, it's been over a year since a song was written for you. Garrett Sever, super talented singer-songwriter, big fan of yours. He's written a few of these, calls them jingles. And you've been on maybe 5 times since he wrote it, and I just keep forgetting to play it for you. So I'd like to play this 30-second jingle dedicated to you by the very talented Garrett Sever.
I'm excited.
To it. Here it is.
Oh, Dr. Jason Johnson keeps pace with his response and neatly unpacks all his thoughts on everything from politics to Comic-Con. And he seems like such a nice guy, and I think you all understand why. You should devour every lesson served at his verbal delicatessen. Dr. Jason Johnson keeps on talking on and on and on and on.
I want a straw hat and a big cane with candy stripes on. I feel like I should be dancing and that there's a barbershop quartet of people with handlebar mustache. That was great. Please tell him I greatly appreciate this, and I want you to send this to me in a link. I have to play this at some other place.
Yeah,
I will play this to an Uber driver. I'm going to share this with my mom. Like that. Thank you. I am humbled and flattered. And frankly, that is the second song that's been written in direct relation to me. The other was a diss track by a black rapping Trump supporter a couple years ago. So this is much better than that.
Coming up, we also have a diss track from another listener. This is Michelle. No, he will have heard that because I taped it. He heard your reaction, and he will hear it when he listens to the show tomorrow. So thank you very, very much, sir.
Thank you, man. Look, Pete, I love you to death, and we do actually need to talk about some other real stuff because
Sure.
I actually particularly need your perspective. So expect to hear from me this week.
Can't help you. Okay, bye. I love you, buddy. Thank you very much.
Love you, man. Later.
All right. He loved it, Gareth. That's awesome. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. If you hear this before that, which you probably won't, probably be after or some other point. Very grateful that you pressed play. Please go give a review on Spotify and iTunes. That's a great form of currency. Those reviews matter a lot. Follow on YouTube and Threads and TikTok and Post and Blue Sky and LinkedIn and all of it. Twitter, Facebook, yeah, it's all there. All those links in the show notes. That's what you got to do if you're an independent media. Put it out far and wide. I really appreciate you. Coming up, Michael Ian Black tomorrow and Christian Finnegan as well on your Saturday show, which I'm planning to drop. But for now, that's it. Talk to you later.
Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. We got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See, all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of the stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.